The celestial Accord station hung in the darkness of space like a jewel made of light and metal. On this particular day, it was alive with color and noise and the movement of 1,000 different species who had come from across the galaxy to celebrate the Festival of United Worlds. Princess Kaith Vasharin of the Thyron Dominion walked through the crowded corridors with the confidence of someone who had never known defeat. Her forearms moved with elegant grace as she acknowledged the bowing heads and respectful whispers that followed her everywhere. She stood 7 feet tall, with skin the color of dark silver and eyes that burned like twin suns. Behind her walked 12 of her finest warriors in ceremonial armor that gleamed under the station lights. "Your Highness," said Commander Vorson, her most trusted advisor, as he matched her pace with his own powerful stride. "The combat exhibitions begin in 1 hour, and the Dominion's fighters are prepared to demonstrate our superiority once again." Kaith smiled, revealing teeth that were sharp and white. She felt the familiar excitement that always came before watching skilled warriors perform their deadly art. "I grow tired of watching others fight," she said, a hint of boredom in her musical voice. "I have not faced a worthy opponent in nearly 3 cycles, and my blades hunger for a real challenge." Vorson nodded with understanding, knowing better than anyone that the princess was not simply royalty. She was a warrior of legendary skill who had defeated over 300 opponents in formal combat, and had never once tasted defeat. They entered the main observation deck where ambassadors, merchants, and soldiers from dozens of species had gathered to watch the exhibitions on massive holographic screens. The noise of conversation filled the air like the buzzing of insects. Kaith's eyes moved across the crowd with the practiced assessment of a predator, noting the nervous glances that many species gave her entourage. The Thyron were known throughout the galaxy as the greatest warriors ever to walk among the stars. Then her gaze fell upon something unexpected. In a quiet corner of the deck, far from the crowds and the noise, a lone figure sat at a small bar with a drink in his hand, his eyes fixed on one of the smaller screens showing the arena below. He was human. Kaith felt her interest spark like a flame catching dry wood. Humans were a curiosity to her people, a young species that had only joined the galactic community a few centuries ago, and had somehow survived despite their obvious physical weaknesses. This human was male and appeared to be somewhere in middle age by their species' short standards, with gray touching the hair at his temples and lines around his eyes that spoke of years and experiences she could not guess. He wore simple civilian clothes with no markings of rank or status, and he sat alone without any companions, guards, or servants attending him. "Commander," Kaith said, her voice carrying the tone of someone who had just found an amusing toy. "What do you know of humans and their combat abilities?" Vorson made a sound that might have been a laugh if he had allowed himself such informality in front of his princess. "Humans are soft creatures, Your Highness," he said with barely hidden contempt. "They have short lives and fragile bodies, and they rely on their technology rather than their own strength. They are not warriors in any meaningful sense of the word." The other members of her entourage murmured their agreement, and several of them looked at the lone human with the same expression they might give to a small and harmless animal. "And yet they control significant territory," Kaith observed. "And they have never been conquered despite their weakness." "Luck and politics," Vorson said dismissively. "Nothing more." Kaith watched the human for another long moment, noticing how still he sat. Not the stillness of boredom or tiredness, but the stillness of someone who was completely comfortable in his own skin and needed nothing from the chaos around him. She made her decision in an instant. She was a princess, she was bored, and she had never spoken to a human before. "Wait here," she commanded, and before Vorson could protest, she was already walking toward the quiet corner where the human sat alone. The human did not look up as she approached, and this small act of either courage or ignorance made her smile grow wider. "You are human," she said, and it was not a question. The man finally turned his head to look at her, and Kaith felt a strange sensation when his eyes met hers. They were pale gray like storm clouds before rain, and they held a depth that seemed wrong for such a short-lived species. "I am," he said, his voice calm and quiet and completely unimpressed by her presence. "And you are Thyron royalty, if I'm reading your markings correctly." I am Princess Kaith Vasherin, she said, waiting for the reaction that always came when lesser beings heard her name, the fear or the awe or the desperate attempt to please. The human simply nodded and said, Marcus Cole. Pleased to meet you, Your Highness. Then he turned back to his drink as if the conversation was already over. Kaith felt something she had not experienced in a very long time, and it took her a moment to recognize it as surprise. You sit alone while warriors from across the galaxy demonstrate their skills, she said. Do humans not appreciate the art of combat? Some do, Marcus said without looking at her. I just prefer to watch from a distance these days. These days, Kaith repeated, her hunter's instincts catching the implication in his words. You speak as if you were once a warrior yourself. I was many things once, he said, and something flickered in those gray eyes, something old and heavy that vanished as quickly as it appeared. Now I'm retired. Kaith laughed, and the sound was bright and sharp, drawing glances from nearby observers who recognized her voice. Retired? She said, as if tasting an unfamiliar food. Humans live such brief lives, and yet you speak of retirement as if you have centuries behind you. Marcus smiled, and it was a tired smile that did not reach his eyes. Some years are longer than others. Kaith felt the challenge rising in her blood. This human was unlike anything she had expected, and his calm refusal to be impressed by her was both infuriating and fascinating. I propose a friendly match, she said, letting her voice carry so that others nearby could hear. A simple sparring session between our species, for cultural exchange and mutual understanding. Several of her warriors had drifted closer, and they laughed at her words because the idea of their princess fighting a human was absurd comedy. Marcus looked at her for a long moment, then slowly shook his head. I appreciate the offer, Your Highness, but I'll have to decline. Like I said, I'm retired. Surely a human would not refuse a princess, Kaith pressed. The crowd was growing as words spread of the confrontation. Unless perhaps your species lacks the courage for such things. The laughter from her entourage grew louder and crueler. Kaith watched the human's face for any sign of anger or shame, but Marcus Cole simply finished his drink and set the glass down gently. When he looked at her again, those gray eyes held something that made the laughter around them seem suddenly hollow and foolish. You really don't want this, Your Highness, he said, his voice soft and serious and carrying no threat, only truth. The laughter died like a fire losing its air. For a single heartbeat, Kaith felt something cold touch her spine. Then she shook it away because she was a princess and a champion, and she had never lost to anyone. I think I do, she said, her smile returning brighter than before. Shall we say 1 hour from now in the main arena? Marcus looked at her with those ancient gray eyes, then sighed like a man accepting a burden he had hoped to avoid. 1 hour, he agreed. But remember that you asked for this. As Kaith walked away with triumph in her step, she did not see the way Commander Vorsen was staring at his data pad with a face that had gone pale as death. Words spread through the celestial accord station like fire through dry grass. Within the hour, every corridor and observation deck was buzzing with the news that Princess Kaith Vasherin had challenged a human to single combat. The main arena was a massive circular space designed to host exhibitions and tournaments from every known martial tradition in the galaxy. Its seats could hold 20,000 spectators from 100 different species. Today, every seat was filled. Ambassadors in their formal robes sat beside merchants in their trading clothes and soldiers in their gleaming armor, all watching the arena floor with a mixture of curiosity and anticipation that electrified the air itself. High above in the royal observation box, the Dhiron delegation waited with confident smiles on their silver faces. They knew what was about to happen. Their beloved princess would demonstrate once again why the Dominion produced the finest warriors in all of known space. Commander Vorsen was not smiling. He stood apart from the others with his data pad clutched in his forehands, his eyes fixed on the arena entrance where the human would soon appear. His mind was racing through information that made his stomach feel like it was filled with ice. He had tried to reach the princess through their private communication channel, but she had disabled it, as she always did before a fight. She believed that true warriors needed no advice or distraction. Now all he could do was watch and hope that he was wrong about what he had discovered. The arena lights shifted to a deep gold as Princess Kaith emerged from the eastern gate, and the crowd erupted in a roar of approval that shook the very walls of the station. She was magnificent. Her ceremonial armor gleamed like liquid silver across her powerful form, and her forearms moved with predatory grace as she raised them to acknowledge the cheering masses. In each of her primary hands, she carried a blade of ancient design, weapons that had been forged in the fires of her homeworld and edged with plasma that could cut through starship hull. She moved to the center of the arena and stood like a goddess of war waiting for her sacrifice. The crowd chanted her name with religious devotion. Then the western gate opened, and the chanting died away into confused silence. Marcus Cole walked into the arena wearing the same plain civilian clothes he had worn at the bar. He carried nothing in his hands and wore no armor on his body. He looked like a man who had wandered into the wrong room at a party. Whispers rippled through the crowd as thousands of beings tried to understand what they were seeing. Many of them laughed at the absurdity of this soft little creature facing the legendary princess of the Dominion. Kaith felt her excitement dim slightly as she watched the human approach. She had hoped for at least some spectacle from her opponent, some exotic human weapon or strange fighting style that would make this exhibition interesting. "You bring no weapons," she called out, her voice carrying across the arena through the sound amplification system. "Do humans fight with their bare hands?" Marcus reached the weapon rack that had been placed at the edge of the arena floor. He studied the various implements that had been provided: energy blades, pulse staffs, molecular whips, and a dozen other instruments of elegant destruction. He selected a simple wooden practice staff, the kind that beginners used when first learning to fight. The crowd burst into laughter that was both mocking and pitiful. Even Kaith felt a twinge of disappointment at her opponent's choice. "You cannot be serious," she said. "I am very serious," Marcus replied, his calm voice somehow cutting through the laughter and silencing it. "I said I would spar with you, Your Highness. I never said I would try to kill you." Kaith felt her pride sting at his words because they implied that he was the one showing mercy rather than the other way around. "Your confidence is amusing," she said, "but misplaced." She dropped into her fighting stance, a position perfected over centuries of the Iran martial tradition. Her four blades wove a pattern in the air that was both beautiful and deadly. Marcus simply held the wooden staff in a loose grip at his side, watching her with those gray eyes that seemed to see everything and reveal nothing. The arena master's voice boomed through the speakers. "This exhibition match will continue until one combatant yields or is unable to continue. Begin." Kaith exploded forward with speed that blurred her silver form. Her four blades struck from four different angles simultaneously in an attack that had killed dozens of opponents who thought they were ready for it. Marcus was not there. He had moved at the exact moment she committed to her attack, sliding sideways with a step that seemed casual but placed him precisely outside her range. Her blades cut empty air where his body had been a heartbeat before. Kaith spun with the fluid recovery of a master warrior and launched a second combination: high strike from the upper left arm, low sweep from the lower right, twin thrusts from the center. Again, Marcus simply was not where her weapons arrived. He had not attacked her, she realized with growing frustration. He had not even raised his staff to block. He was just moving, flowing around her assault like water around a stone. No matter how fast or clever her attacks became, she could not seem to touch him. The crowd had fallen silent because what they were witnessing made no sense to their understanding of combat. Here was Princess Kaith Vasherin, four-armed champion of the Dominion, undefeated in over 300 matches, wielding weapons that could cut through armor like paper. And she could not land a single blow on an unarmed human with a stick. Minutes passed, and Kaith felt something she had never experienced in combat: doubt. She was faster than this human. She was certain of it. Her species could process information and react to threats far more quickly than the slow neurons of a human brain. And yet every time she attacked, he was already gone, as if he knew where her blades would be before she did. The truth crept into her mind like cold water seeping through cracks in a wall. He was reading her, every movement of her body, every shift of her weight, every flicker of her eyes. He was seeing all of it, and understanding what it meant and responding before she even finished deciding what to do. This was not luck or speed or strength. This was something else entirely. Kate stopped her assault, and stood breathing hard in the center of the arena. She looked at Marcus Cole with new eyes that were beginning to see the shape of something terrifying hidden beneath his ordinary appearance. "What are you?" she asked, her voice quiet enough that only he could hear. Marcus looked at her with something that might have been sadness, or might have been respect. "I'm exactly what I said I was," he replied. "Retired." In the observation box high above, Commander Vorson finally managed to push through his fellow officers to reach the communication console. His fingers flew across the controls as he desperately tried to reach his princess. "Your Highness, please respond," he said into the microphone. "You must stop this fight immediately. That man is not what he appears." But Katha's communicator remained silent because she had disabled it. Vorson turned to the officers around him with panic in his eyes. "Someone stop this match," he commanded. "Contact the arena master and halt the exhibition now." "On what grounds?" asked Admiral Thesson, watching the fight with growing concern. "The princess is unharmed. She is fighting Marcus Cole," Vorson said, his voice cracking with desperate urgency. "The human Marcus Cole. Do you understand what that means?" Admiral Thesson's 4 eyes blinked in confusion. "I do not know that name." Vorson grabbed the Admiral's arm with a grip that would have crushed weaker bones. "Look it up," he said. "Search the military archives for human conflicts. Search for the Siege of Titan. Search for the name they gave him." He leaned closer and spoke words that drained the color from every face that heard them. "Search for the blackout." The arena fell into a hush that was deeper than silence as Commander Vorson burst through the doors and ran toward the fighting floor, his ceremonial robes flying behind him like the wings of a desperate bird. "Your Highness, stop!" he screamed, his voice cracking through the amplification system and echoing off the walls. "Step away from that man!" 20,000 spectators turned to look at the Dhiron commander who had broken every protocol of formal combat by interrupting a match in progress. Princess Kate lowered her blades with confusion and anger mixing on her silver features. "Vorson, what is the meaning of this?" she demanded as her advisor stumbled to a halt at the edge of the arena floor. "You dishonor yourself and the Dominion with this behavior." Vorson was breathing hard, his 4 hands shaking as he pointed at the human who stood calmly in the center of the arena, still holding his wooden staff. "That man," Vorson gasped. "That man is Marcus Cole. The human they call the Blackout of Titan." The words meant nothing to Kate, but she saw the reaction they caused in the crowd, gasps and murmurs and sudden movements, as beings reached for their data pads to search for information. Most striking of all was the way several human spectators in the audience rose to their feet with expressions of shock and reverence. "I do not know this name," Kate said. "Explain yourself." Vorson turned to address not just his princess but the entire arena, his voice carrying the weight of someone delivering terrible news. 40 years ago, the Rexan Collective invaded human space with a fleet of 10,000 warships. They were a species of conquerors who had never known defeat, and they believed that humanity would fall within days. Marcus Cole had not moved from his position, his face showing no emotion as the commander continued speaking. Their target was a civilian station called Titan Base, home to 2 million human colonists, families, children, elderly who had no way to defend themselves, Vorson said. The human military was scattered across their territory and could not respond in time. The Rexan landing forces numbered over 100,000 soldiers. The arena was utterly silent now as every being present listened with growing understanding. The station had a garrison of 200 human soldiers, Vorson continued. 200 against 100,000. They should have been overrun in hours. He paused and looked at Marcus with an expression that mixed fear with something like awe. They held for 11 days. A ripple of disbelief moved through the crowd. The numbers made no sense. 200 soldiers could not hold against such overwhelming force for 11 minutes, let alone 11 days. How? Kate asked, her voice barely a whisper. Because of him, Borson said, pointing at Marcus. Captain Marcus Cole, commander of the garrison and the man who designed and executed a defense that militaries across the galaxy now study as the greatest last stand in recorded history. He pulled up a holographic display from his data pad, and images began to appear in the air above the arena, images of corridors filled with bodies and blast marks, evidence of fighting so intense that the walls themselves had melted. The humans turn every corridor into a death trap and every room into an ambush point. When the Rexen adapted their tactics, the humans adapted faster, Borson explained. They gave ground when they had to and took it back when they could. Every hour they bought was an hour for their fleet to arrive. The images shifted to show medical reports and casualty figures that made several spectators gasp in horror. By the 8th day, the garrison was down to 40 soldiers. Still they held, Borson said. By the 10th day, there were 12. Still they held. He turned to face Marcus directly. On the 11th day, the human reinforcements finally arrived. Do you know what they found? Kate shook her head slowly. They found the station intact, Borson said. They found 2 million civilians alive. And they found 9,000 Rexen soldiers dead in the corridors. The number hung in the air like a physical weight. 9,000, Kate repeated. And at the heart of the station, standing over the bodies of the last Rexen assault wave, they found one man. Every eye in the arena turned to Marcus Cole. He had fought alone for 72 hours after the rest of his unit fell, Borson said. 72 hours without sleep or rest or reinforcement. When his ammunition ran out, he used blades. When his blades broke, he used his hands. The images on the holographic display changed one final time to show a recording that had been recovered from the Rexen flagship, their commander's final transmission to his homeworld. The audio played through the arena speakers, a chaos of static and screaming and weapons fire. Beneath it all was a single sound that made Kaitha's blood run cold, the slow, steady breathing of a human predator hunting his prey in the darkness. That is why they call him the Blackout, Borson said quietly. Because the Rexen commander died in the dark, listening to that breathing get closer and closer until it was the last thing he ever heard. The recording ended, and the silence that followed was absolute. Kate looked at Marcus Cole, at this ordinary-looking human in his plain clothes with his wooden staff, and she finally understood what she was seeing. He was not a warrior the way she was a warrior. He was something far more dangerous. He was a survivor. The Rexen Collective surrendered to humanity 6 months later, Borson said. Not because they were defeated in open battle, but because they were afraid. Afraid that every human they met might be hiding what Marcus Cole hid beneath his surface. Marcus finally moved, lowering his staff and looking at Borson with those gray eyes that had seen things no being should ever have to see. That was a long time ago, he said simply. 40 years is nothing, Borson replied. Legends do not fade so quickly. Kate stepped forward, noticing that her hands were trembling slightly. Not with fear, she told herself, but with something else entirely. You let me attack you, she said to Marcus. You could have ended this fight at any moment. Instead, you just moved and let me exhaust myself. Yes, Marcus agreed. Why? Because you asked for a sparring match, Marcus said. And sparring is about learning, not about winning. I was trying to show you your openings without hurting you. Kate felt the weight of those words settle onto her shoulders like a heavy cloak. She had challenged this man as a joke, as entertainment for herself and her entourage. And he had responded by trying to teach her. I have been fighting for 300 years, she said. I have defeated champions and warriors and soldiers from every major species in the galaxy. And you say you could see openings in my technique? I could see 17, Marcus said. 18 if you count the way you telegraph your upper left strike by shifting your weight too early. The honesty in his voice was more devastating than any insult could have been. Kate looked around at the arena full of spectators watching her with expressions ranging from pity to fascination. She felt something she had never felt before in her long life of victory, humility. Then she made a decision. She raised her blades again and dropped into her fighting stance. She saw surprise flicker across Marcus Cole's weathered face. "What are you doing?" he asked. "I came here for a lesson," Kate said. "And I intend to receive one. Show me, human legend. Show me what I cannot see." Marcus studied her for a long moment, and something changed in his gray eyes. A light that had been buried deep came flickering back to life. "You understand that this will hurt," he said. Kate smiled with all of her sharp white teeth. "I am a princess of the Dominion," she said. "I have never been afraid of pain." Marcus Cole nodded slowly, then did something that made Kate's warrior instincts scream in sudden alarm. He shifted his stance. It was a small movement, just a subtle adjustment of his feet and a slight lowering of his center of gravity. But to Kate's trained eyes, it was like watching a door open into a dark room full of terrible things. The temperature in the arena seemed to drop by several degrees. "Remember," Marcus said quietly, "you asked for this." Then he moved. The wooden staff became a blur. Kate had spent 3 centuries mastering the art of combat. She had fought opponents who moved with supernatural speed, enemies who could predict her attacks through psychic abilities, warriors who felt no pain and knew no fear. But she had never experienced anything like what happened in the next 30 seconds. Marcus Cole flowed across the arena floor like water rushing through cracks in a dam. His simple wooden staff struck her 17 times before she could even begin to understand what was happening. The first hit caught her right shoulder and numbed her primary arm so that her blade almost slipped from her fingers. The second and third came so fast they felt like a single impact against her knee and ribs. Then the strikes were landing everywhere at once in a storm of precise violence that left her staggering. Each blow was placed with surgical accuracy on joints, nerve clusters, and vulnerable points that Kate had not even known existed in her own anatomy. Each blow was delivered with exactly enough force to cause pain and damage without crippling her permanently. He was not trying to beat her. He was dismantling her defense piece by piece, showing her every weakness in her technique with impacts she would feel for days. Kate retreated across the arena, her forearms moving desperately to block and parry. But Marcus flowed around her defenses like smoke through fingers, and his staff found her again and again in places she thought she had protected. The crowd watched in stunned silence as something impossible unfolded before their eyes. A 4-armed alien princess with centuries of training and plasma-edged blades being systematically taken apart by a middle-aged human with a stick. "Your upper left," Marcus said as his staff cracked against her shoulder. "You always drop it when you commit to a thrust." Kate snarled and launched a counterattack with all 4 blades, weaving a pattern of death that should have been impossible to avoid. Marcus stepped inside her guard, literally inside the arc of her weapons where they could not reach him. His staff jabbed twice into her ribs before he flowed back out again. "You extend too far with your lower arms," he continued. "It gives you reach but leaves your core open. Stop talking!" Kate roared, throwing herself at him with every ounce of speed and strength her body could produce. For one glorious moment, she thought she had him. Her upper right blade was perfectly positioned and moving too fast for any reaction. Then Marcus did something with his staff that changed its angle in a way her brain could not follow. Suddenly she was spinning through the air. She hit the ground hard and rolled to her feet immediately because a warrior never stayed down. But Marcus was already there, his staff pressed gently against her throat. "Dead," he said simply. He stepped back and lowered his staff. Kate stared at him with wide golden eyes that had just witnessed something her mind struggled to accept. "Again?" she demanded. Marcus tilted his head slightly. "You want more?" I said again. Something that might have been approval flickered across Marcus's weathered face, and he nodded once before flowing back into motion. The fight, if it could still be called a fight, continued for another 10 minutes. Kate attacked with everything she knew, trying combinations she had not used in decades and techniques she had learned from masters long dead. Marcus countered them all with the same effortless precision. But slowly, impossibly, she began to adapt. She learned to keep her upper left guard high even when attacking. The next time Marcus aimed for that shoulder, her blade was there to meet his staff. The crack of contact echoed through the silent arena. "Good," Marcus said, genuine warmth in his voice. Kaith learned to keep her lower arms closer to her body. When Marcus tried to slip inside her guard, she was able to create enough space to force him back. "Better," Marcus acknowledged. She learned to watch his feet instead of his hands because his feet told her where he would be before his hands began to move. With this knowledge, she finally managed to land a blow of her own. Her blade caught his arm as he dodged, just a graze, barely enough to draw blood, but it was contact, and it was real. The crowd gasped at the sight of red drops falling to the arena floor. Marcus looked down at the cut on his arm, then looked at Kaith with a smile that transformed his entire face from weary veteran to something almost young. "Excellent," he said, and he meant it. Kaith felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the exertion of combat. It was the warmth of genuine growth, of becoming better at something she had thought she had already mastered. "First blood," she said with a fierce grin. "I believe that means I win." "It means you learned," Marcus replied. "Which is better than winning." He lowered his staff again and stepped back, clearly intending to end the match there. But Kaith was not finished. She could feel herself standing at the edge of understanding something important, and she needed to push just a little further. She charged without warning. Her 4 blades moved in a pattern she had never used before, a pattern she invented in that moment based on everything she had learned in the past 15 minutes. She saw surprise flash across Marcus's face as he was forced to actually defend rather than simply avoid. For 5 seconds they fought as equals. Staff met blade and blade met staff in a dance of violence that was beautiful in its deadly precision. Kaith felt herself pushed to limits she had never known she possessed. Then Marcus ended it. His staff moved in a spiral that seemed to defy physics. Suddenly all 4 of her blades were flying through the air in different directions, disarmed by a single motion that her brain would spend years trying to understand. His foot hooked her ankle, and she was falling. Before she could react, the staff was pressed across her throat and Marcus was kneeling over her with those gray eyes looking down without malice or triumph. "Dead?" he said again. The silence in the arena stretched for a long moment. Then Kaith did something that shocked everyone watching, including herself. She laughed. It started as a small sound and grew into something full and genuine and joyful. She lay on the arena floor, laughing up at the human who had just defeated her in front of 20,000 witnesses. "In 300 years," she gasped between bursts of laughter. "In 300 years of fighting, I have never learned so much in such a short time." Marcus released her and stood, offering his hand to help her rise. Kaith took it without hesitation. "What are you people?" she asked as she got to her feet, her voice carrying across the silent arena. "I have fought warriors from 100 species, and none of them have ever made me feel like a student in my first lesson. What are humans that you can produce someone like this?" Marcus looked at her with those ancient gray eyes. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but somehow reached every corner of the vast space. "We are survivors," he said. "Nothing more and nothing less. We don't live as long as your people, and we're not as strong or as fast. But we have survived everything the universe has thrown at us." He looked around at the thousands of spectators watching them, species from across the galaxy who had come to see a princess humiliate a weak human and had instead witnessed something they would remember for the rest of their lives. "Every human you meet carries the potential for what I am," Marcus continued. "Because we learned long ago that the universe doesn't care about potential or destiny or birthright. It only respects those who refuse to die." He turned back to Kaith, something like kindness in his expression. "Your people are born warriors," he said. "Mine become warriors when we have no other choice. And sometimes what necessity creates is more dangerous than what nature provides." Kaith stared at him as understanding dawned in her golden eyes. This man was not a monster or a supernatural being or a genetic experiment. He was simply a human who had been pushed to the absolute limit of what his species could become. And he had survived the process. And if one human could become this, then any human could become this. She looked at the cut on his arm, the small wound she had managed to inflict, and realized that it meant more than any of her previous 300 victories combined. She had fought a legend and earned his respect. That was worth more than winning could ever be. The hours following the exhibition match were filled with chaos and conversation as news of what had happened spread through the celestial Accord station and then beyond to the wider galaxy through countless communication channels. Princess Kate found herself surrounded by advisors, ambassadors, and curious observers who wanted to discuss the political implications of her very public defeat. She handled them all with a grace and patience that surprised even herself. But as the artificial night cycle fell over the station and the crowds finally thinned, she excused herself from her entourage and went searching for the man who had changed her understanding of the universe in the span of a single afternoon. She found Marcus Cole on a small observation balcony on the far side of the station, alone as he had been when she first saw him, standing at the viewport and looking out at the endless field of stars. He did not turn as she approached, but she knew he was aware of her presence. A man like him was always aware of everything around him. "I wondered if you would come," he said. "I had questions," Kate replied, moving to stand beside him at the viewport. "And you seem like someone who might have answers." Marcus smiled slightly but kept his eyes on the stars. "I've found that the older I get, the more questions I have and the fewer answers I'm certain of." They stood together in comfortable silence for a moment, two warriors from different worlds sharing the peace of the darkness between stars. "You held back," Kate said finally. "In the arena, even when you were teaching me, you were holding back." It was not a question. "Yes," Marcus agreed. "How much?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment before answering. "Enough that you would survive and learn," he said, which was all that mattered. Kate felt a chill run through her, as she truly understood for the first time just how outmatched she had been. Her defeat had not been a close thing or a narrow margin, but rather a complete mismatch that Marcus had chosen to make educational rather than fatal. "Why?" she asked. "Why show mercy to someone who challenged you out of arrogance and ignorance?" Marcus turned to look at her then, his gray eyes holding a depth of experience that made her 3 centuries feel like a brief childhood. "Because killing you would have been easy," he said. "And easy is never worth doing. Teaching you was difficult, and difficult things are the only things that matter." He looked back at the stars. "I've killed many beings in my life," he continued. "Some because I had to, some because there was no other choice. But every death stays with me. I've learned that the true measure of strength is not how many you can defeat, but how many you choose not to." Kate thought about her own centuries of combat, the victories and the defeats she had dealt to others. She realized she had never thought about it that way. "On Titan," she said carefully, "when you fought alone for those 72 hours, did you have a choice then?" Marcus was silent for a long time. "There are always choices," he said eventually. "I could have hidden with the civilians and waited for rescue. I could have surrendered and hoped for mercy. I could have taken my own life rather than face what was coming." His hands tightened slightly on the viewport railing. "I chose to fight because those 2 million people had no one else," he said. "And I kept fighting because every minute I bought was a minute they stayed alive. That was the only choice that mattered. And the Rexen who died? They made their choice when they came to murder innocents," Marcus said, his voice flat and hard in a way that reminded Kate of the breathing she had heard in that recording. "I don't mourn predators who chose to become prey." They stood in silence again. Kate found herself seeing the human beside her with new understanding. He was not a monster who enjoyed killing, nor a broken soul haunted by what he had done. He was simply a man who had faced impossible odds and done what was necessary, and who carried the weight of that necessity with quiet dignity. "You said that any human could become what you are," she said. "Do you truly believe that?" "I do," Marcus replied. "Not because we're special or chosen or superior, but because we have to be." He turned to face her fully. "The Dion evolved on a world of plenty," he said. "Your strength and your speed and your 4 arms were gifts given to you by an easy environment that rewarded physical excellence. You became warriors because you could, not because you had to. And humans? Humans evolved on a world that tried to kill us every single day, Marcus said. We weren't the strongest or the fastest or the most numerous. We were prey for creatures that could tear us apart without effort. We lived on a planet that sent ice ages and plagues and disasters to wipe us out generation after generation. His gray eyes held hers with an intensity that made her want to look away. We survived by being adaptable, he continued. By refusing to give up no matter how impossible the odds. We learned to turn every disadvantage into a weapon and every weakness into a strength. And we pass that knowledge to our children, who pass it to their children. He gestured at the stars beyond the viewport. Every human who has ever lived carries the survival instincts of 100,000 generations, he said. And when one of us is pushed far enough, all of that potential wakes up at once. That is what I am. And that is what any human can become. Kate absorbed his words and felt something shift in her understanding of the galaxy and her place in it. My people have always seen humanity as a young and weak species, she admitted. A curiosity to be studied and perhaps protected, but never a true equal. And now I think we've made a very dangerous mistake, Kate said. And I think I'm glad I learned the truth through a sparring match rather than a war. Marcus smiled, a real smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes and made him look almost gentle. That was my hope, he said. Lessons are always better than funerals. Kate felt herself smile and return despite everything. When I take my throne, she said, I will pursue alliance with humanity. Not because I fear you, but because I respect you. And because I think our peoples could learn much from each other. That would be wise, Marcus agreed. And generous. It would be practical, Kate corrected him. My advisors will argue against it, but I've found that advisors are often wrong about the things that matter most. She extended her upper right hand in the human gesture of agreement she had learned during her diplomatic training. Thank you, Marcus Cole, she said, for the lesson and for the mercy you showed in teaching it. Marcus took her hand and shook it once in the human fashion. Thank you for being willing to learn, he replied. That's rarer than you might think. He released her hand and turned back toward the interior of the station, clearly preparing to leave. One more question, Kate called after him. He paused and looked back. Why are you here? She asked. Why come to a festival full of warriors when you clearly want nothing more than to be left alone? Marcus was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer than she had heard it before. My wife loved this festival, he said. She always said it was a celebration of what people could become rather than what they were born as. She passed away 3 years ago, but I still come every year to remember her. Kate felt her heart ache at the simple grief in his words. She must have been remarkable. She was a nurse, Marcus said with a smile that held both joy and sorrow. She spent her life healing people rather than hurting them. And she was the strongest person I ever knew. He began walking away. Goodbye, Princess Kate Vacheron, he said over his shoulder. I hope your reign is long and peaceful. Kate watched him go until he disappeared into the station corridors. Then she turned back to the viewport and the endless stars beyond. Commander Vorson found her there an hour later, still staring at the darkness with a thoughtful expression on her silver face. Your Highness, he said carefully, the delegation is concerned about the political implications of today's events. They wish to discuss strategies for managing the situation. Kate did not look at him. Tell them that there is nothing to manage, she said. I challenged a human and I was defeated. That is the truth, and I will not pretend otherwise. But Your Highness, the embarrassment. The embarrassment is mine to bear, Kate interrupted. And I bear it gladly because the alternative was ignorance. She finally turned to face her commander. Let me ask you something, Vorson, she said. If every human has the potential to become what Marcus Cole became, if every single one of their billions carries the seeds of that kind of warrior inside them, what does that mean for any species foolish enough to make them our enemy? Vorson had no answer. That is what I learned today, Kate said. And that lesson was worth any amount of embarrassment. She walked past him toward the interior of the station but paused at the doorway. "Send a message to our homeworld," she ordered. "Tell my father that when I return, I will be proposing a formal alliance with the human government. And tell him that this is not a request." She smiled at the memory of gray eyes and a wooden staff and a man who had chosen to teach rather than destroy. "Tell him that I've learned why humanity has never been conquered," she said. "And I believe it's better to be their friend than their enemy." Across the station, Marcus Cole boarded his small shuttle and set a course for home. He thought about a princess who had been brave enough to ask for a lesson and wise enough to learn from it. Perhaps there was hope for the galaxy after all.